Hey everyone, welcome to Legend Haven. This is a special recording of our Legend Makers show, and we're joined by Mary Jessica Woods. Hi Mary, how are you?
Good. I'm great. Very happy to be here.
Good, so glad to have you back. You did help us kick off the first episode of Legend Makers, so it's fun to have you back to talk about Mark Maker and, in this case, morally resonant cultures. And so we'll get to that in just a second. Mary is a Byzantine Catholic writer of science fiction and fantasy. Her debut novel, Mark Maker, it's a space fantasy about alien tattoo artists, just released in October from Chrism Press. Mary, what was the key idea that we wanted to walk around today?
So, when I was thinking of what to come up with for this talk, I really wanted to do something on world building, but specifically not so much sort of the like the nuts and bolts, of like making a planet or the geography and climate, or sort of like the nuts and bolts of building a physical world that makes sense. I was kind of wanting to talk more about the cultural aspect of world building, the human side, quote unquote. It doesn't actually matter whether your characters are humans or not,
Right.
because that's something I've thought about a lot. Because the cultural context, the kinds of societies that your characters come from, when you're writing a story, that will have like the most immediate impact on like the characters' worldviews, their beliefs, and thus their own motivations in the story and the sources of conflict that come up between characters. And this is just something I've thought about a lot because oftentimes, if I'm reading a contemporary sci-fi or fantasy book, you just kind of get this sense that even though the world is fantastic and exotic and something we've never seen before, the characters often just kind of feel like they've been cut and pasted out of 21st century, sort of this very modern mindset, and you're like, this doesn't actually make sense for the world you're living in. How could you have these these ideals, or be outraged at these at this particular kind of injustice, if this is what you're used to.
Right. Exactly. So how would you define that? Let's define the word culture, because
Sure.
I like this turn of phrase that you've been walking around, creating a morally resonant culture. So first, how would you define a culture the way you're thinking about it?
Well, this is very loose because that's obviously a big question. But I think just in general, in terms of a story world building, it's the general society and sort of social norms that a character grows up in. Whatever their peers are. If they live in like a city or a rural setting, or just like what social class they are, very high ranking or kind of, and more lower ranking or just not high up on the social ladder. All of those will have an effect on how a person thinks, what they consider important. Right. And then also culture also includes, and this is I think really important, is a general kind of what are the underlying religious / moral norms of the society. Right. And this is not to say that you have to build a fictional, like every fictional culture you build has to have a religion. Sometimes a fictional culture doesn't have a religion, but that is also significant. So just kind of like, what are the underlying beliefs about what is right and wrong, what's acceptable, what are acceptable ways of treating other people. I think roughly that's
So I wonder if we could say a culture is what a set of people accept as this is what is normal.
Hmm.
This is what we all accept as good. This is what we all accept as bad, and this is what is normal. And that's how you get things like competing cultures in
Right.
story or heck, in reality, where
Yeah.
people who live by the ocean, the seaside versus the desert, have different senses of what is allowed, what is normal, what does not feel normal, and it's I like to say sticking that landing with your character and owning the fact that they're going to live in a don't make it a perfect world or a perfect culture. In fact, give it a couple of very distinctive flaws and make the character think, yeah, this is normal. And then
Hmm.
perhaps over the course of the journey, maybe there's a bit of wrestling with that, maybe not.
Hmm.
Um, so, what are some examples then to help us start to understand what you mean by a morally, like creating a story or a character that's morally resonant?
Yeah. So one of the examples that I was thinking of talking about is one of my favorite fantasy novels, which is Watership Down by Richard Adams. I think it was published in 1970 something, so it's a little bit of an older book, and but it's honestly one of the most compelling fantasy novels I've ever read. For people who aren't familiar with the premise, it's basically set in rural England, like contemporary setting. So it's not a fantastic world, but the story is all about um, it's about these wild rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the characters in the story are rabbits, and basically they're warned their home is destroyed by like a construction project, and so they have to escape and find a place to settle a new home. And this sounds almost idyllic in that description. Like it could be a kid's story.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, it is not a kid's story. It is about as terrifying and brutal as like a real wild rabbit's life is.
Wow.
Um, and so one of the things that I love about the book, which ties into this sort of the culture question, is that the author did a lot of research about how rabbits actually live in the wild and
Mm-hmm.
what their behaviors are and how their warrens, how like wild rabbit society works.
Mm-hmm.
So he took all this research, of real life interactions between these animals, and then sort of fleshed out, like used that to build out this society. Like, what if they were, also kind of intelligent?
Mm-hmm.
What would their society look like? So what this ends up doing is that it feels very authentic.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, even though it's anthropomorphic to some extent,
Yeah.
obviously, they don't actually have a language or, sort of different personalities in the way that people have different personalities. Um, it feels like a real society, but it feels like very not human.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very rabbit.
Yeah.
They care about things that rabbits care about, not that humans care about. And yet,
Right.
he also manages to walk the line well to like craft characters that you end up caring about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Makes
yeah,
it very believable within how they would see the world and then what they would not maybe think about. And I really think that's what makes not only fiction so compelling, but when an author really does that well, they pull you in because this is not something you have experienced, as opposed
right.
to an author that's trying to take, like you said earlier, transplant a modern consciousness, a modern mind, and just drop it in the past and then use that as a way to make commentary on the past through the character's actions and so on. There was a movie I watched where a Viking character, it was a Viking story, and it was like deep in the Viking hinterlands. And there's this one morose young Viking who like wants to be a leader, and so he goes on an adventure for something, and it was very violent and whatever. And at one point, they're getting towards the end, and they come across this weird cult, and they're fighting it or something. And one guy says to the hero, "These are dark times; they call for dark deeds," you know. And then the hero leans in and says, "No, they call for light," you know. And I thought, that's a great sentiment. I don't understand where you would have gotten that idea in your whole culture. There's nothing in your culture that says that is a practical idea. And then he's running around thinking kind of like a modern Western person in terms of human dignity and saving other people. And it's like, the ancient world didn't actually think that way about
Mhm.
people. So it's like you're saying, know your culture, even if you're making it up, be consistent with it. What's a sci-fi example? Since you love sci-fi, what's a sci-fi example you like to talk about?
Yeah, well, the example that came to mind is a little bit obscure, quite a bit more obscure than Watership Down, I'm pretty sure. It's actually a video game that came out about 10 years ago, I think, called Primordia. And it's a little point-and-click adventure game. It's got this like sort of beautiful pixel art style. But the premise of the story in the game is that it's this sort of post-apocalyptic Earth. I think it's Earth. It's actually never mentioned whether or not it's Earth. But there's been some kind of, disaster that has basically just destroyed the environment. And there are no humans. We don't know what happened to them. They're just sort of gone. And the only people who are left are robots. So there's a whole like society of robots that has just kind of been like perpetuating itself. The robots build more robots, and so they sort of increase, and they've so they're living in a society which is, it looks sort of comparable to a human society. They just all happen to be machines. And the creator really leaned into, what sort of the implications of a society like this would be. I mean, there's fun little things, like in the dialogue, like they have, like for their sort of, like curse word or expletive, it's basad, blue screen of death, because they're all computers. So little things like that, which they're not always explained, but they're just sort of there, which makes it kind of fun and immersive. But the essential storyline is that you're playing this main character this robot, he kind of lives out in the wasteland. And then this other robot comes and steals like the power source from his ship, which is like life and death to a robot, right? So he has to follow this thief back to this robot city. And when he gets to the city, he learns that it's not this paradise of power and light that he's heard about. There's some pretty deep, some pretty terrible things going on. And then one of the most interesting things about sort of the cultural setting for the story was that we learned very early on that the main character is a follower of the gospel of man. Now, from a Christian perspective, this immediately sounds heretical, right? But the really funny thing is that within the context of the story, the gospel of man is actually just what the robots believe about their own creation.
Their own makers.
Right. It's like man was our maker. We were built to serve him, etc. And we find out throughout the course of the story that there are other robots who don't believe in man. Like, oh yeah, man is a myth. What are you talking about? We created ourselves. And it's really great because it's not that sort of underlying moral element is present, but the writer is not like hitting you over the head about that fact. You just sort of start to notice that the robots who believe that they invented, created themselves and aren't accountable to anyone else, are the characters who tend to, just use other robots, like their fellow robots, as just objects and not people. So like they're sort of the sources of the corruption of this society because they've forgotten where they actually come from. So that was
So it all holds together, and it helps you to start thinking like a robot, because it's done with consistency.
Right.
What about your own book then, Mark Maker? You created a complete fantasy, sorry, not fantasy, sci-fi premise and an idea, and then worked really hard to make it believable and so on. Tell us about Mark Maker and how you created something that was morally resonant.
Yeah. So this was really fun. I mean, obviously, um, this was something I really cared about, and it was sort of the genesis of the whole book in a way, um, because I sort of had this setting, and then I had the idea for this race already, that had all these ceremonial tattoos that everyone got
Mm-hmm.
for important life events. And then I just like leaned into that and sort of started thinking like, what would that actually be like? How would this have an effect on um, people's culture and, the way that individuals would act and the choices they would make.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and I remember, so just a little bit of the premise for people who haven't read or heard about the book before. So yeah, alien society with ceremonial tattoos. The tattoo artists, the mark makers, are these very important figures who are sworn to truth telling.
Mm-hmm.
So the main character finds himself in a situation where he is forced to give a mark of exile to someone that he knows is innocent. And then that sort of puts him in this moral crisis. um, he's broken his oath, so he's essentially like from the way he's been raised and what he believes about his own culture and what's right and wrong. Like the fact that he's made a false mark basically damns him. He doesn't know like how you're redeemed from that.
Mm-hmm.
But he sort of like starts unconsciously reaching towards some kind of redemption by going down to the underbelly, the place where all the exiles live, and giving them marks because they're just these total outcasts from society. But that is also illegal. So he's very morally conflicted. And it was funny because in the early drafts, when I started, showing this to friends and family, one reaction that I got, multiple times was like, why does he feel so guilty about going down to serve these exiles? Because he's clearly doing a good thing. Like, no, you don't understand. Like part of him, like this sort of unconscious part of him knows it's a good thing. But everything about his culture and his status and his job and everything that he's been trained to do to follow the law about the tattoos, he's like, no, I'm a criminal. I'm a terrible person.
So then the real question is, what is inciting him or inspiring him to go down at all? Where does that then come from? I think that's really the more important question.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it came out of this because he knew that he had helped to exile someone who didn't deserve it. So he knew that. And so that was sort of giving him this need to find a resolution to that problem, even if it meant breaking more laws in the process.
Yeah.
Which is obviously, I found that very compelling as a premise for a character. Just living in that kind of really a society that doesn't understand forgiveness is what it boils down to. And he's trying to grope his way towards some semblance of that, even though, he's not been given an example of it.
So in starting to wrap up here, what would you want to encourage or inspire people when they're crafting a sci-fi world or a culture or a fantasy culture or something? What would you really want to encourage them to take seriously and think hard about?
I would say, first of all, do your research. If you're sort of intentionally basing the culture off a real life culture, that can help. Or even if you're not, just researching real life cultures, which are sort of similar to the one you're trying to create, can help give inspiration and sort of that inner consistency for real life.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other main thing I would say is, don't just sort of give the trappings for an exotic culture.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, and just I guess to use my own book as an example, for me, what was fun about it, because the tattoos could have just been sort of a fun flavor element for this world.
Mm-hmm.
And the story could have been about something else, but the fact that the ceremonial tattoos are the actual main source of the conflict really drives home what a different culture this is
Mm-hmm.
from our own, and how
Yeah.
different the things are that they care about, but also the same in a way, because it highlights these questions of truth
Yeah.
and falsehood and justice, but in a way we're not used to seeing them.
Right. They do. They feel like, they act like metaphors for our own culture and things that we run around working with or wearing or doing, that effectively are sigils of our own
Right.
placement or traditions or things we believe and so on.
Yeah. So I would just say to really, whatever sort of unique cultural elements you choose for your world, really lean into that. Don't let it be just the decoration,
Mm-hmm.
but have it really mean something, and have what your characters care about, or their motivations, be related to those those unique elements.
Yeah. So if this thing was something that is serious to the world, think about the impact or the consequences that's going to have on daily living. Mary, thank you for coming on. This was great. And you're even hosting, for those who are at the con this year, you're hosting like a book launch for Mark Maker. People can stick around in the booth and hang around and chat with you. Is there anything special that you're doing during this booth? Perhaps a read aloud?
Yeah, I'm going to be reading a short little excerpt from part of the book, which will hopefully show off, some of these things we've been talking about. And yeah, just have some time for Q&A if people want to ask about the book or about cultures and world building and stuff. And then I'll also be doing a giveaway, so anyone who attends the booth will be automatically entered in a giveaway to get a signed copy of Mark Maker and 3 character art prints of some of the characters from the book. So if you'd like to get in on that, definitely come on by, and would love to see you there.
Fantastic. Where can folk find you online if they want to get their own copy or join your mailing list? Where are you online?
Yes, so you can find me at my website, which is maryjessicawoods.com. You can join my author newsletter there. And then you can also find me on social media on both Facebook and Instagram, just under my name, Mary Jessica Woods.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Mary, for coming on. Thanks, everyone. We hope that you enjoy the con. And if this is your first time hearing about Legend Fiction, or you're catching this replay afterwards, Legend Fiction is the creative community for modern Catholic and Orthodox authors. We're all about creating a space where you can give and get feedback, share your works in progress, and maybe double or triple your writing output, because we're all having so much fun. Come and check us out at legendfiction.com. Till next time, keep writing, and we hope you enjoy the con. God bless.